Good afternoon, everyone. Smatho Adgee here, live from the Colonial Brewing Company here in Port Melbourne. We're here for the Draftstars $200,000 live final presented by Kayo Sports in conjunction with the Colonial Brewing Company. We are live here at Port Melbourne today for an edition of the DFR Down Under show. Very excited to be here today, and well, I've got a special guest with me. Unfortunately, it's not Big Hef. We have one of our DFR's finalists in Adgee. Good afternoon, mate. Welcome to the show.
Good to see you, Smatho, and how fantastic is it down here at the Colonial Brewing Company? It's a really amazing venue, and look, the excitement about what's going to happen today and the chance to win $200,000 is just awesome. It's just excellent.
It is awesome and excellent. Now, people are already asking already on the feed, why are you in Hef's shoes today? What has happened this afternoon?
Look, Hef's been caught back in Tasmania on a little bit of personal business, so we obviously wish him the best of luck. He'll still have his teams in, having a crack, but unfortunately I've had to try to fill into some big shoes today, so we'll see how we go with some of the advice we give, but he's certainly been very quick to give me a few pointers to help anyone that's trying to build some teams last minute to give them the best chance to win some money.
Yep. And let's put on the record right now, if Hef does get up today, I might have to get up and take that belt from the owners of Draftstars, but we'll see what happens with it today. Mate, we're going to go through today's actual Adelaide versus West Coast game here at Optus Stadium. Let us set it up the team as we do with Hef as always, so let me get my notes out here, and we've got West Coast versus Adelaide, 27.5 line, so round 4 goal head start here for Adelaide Crows, 168.5 line, which is pretty decent compared to what we had in the past. Look, teams will come out very shortly, approximately around 4 o'clock, so we will have to monitor those, so make sure you keep an eye on our Twitter feed in terms of their final teams. I've checked out the resources on the DFR website as always, and I found it's pretty grim if you're on Adelaide players today. They're pretty look, they are cheap on the salaries, but in terms of the data, Eagles all over them in terms of the previous 5 games for the backs, the mids, the forwards, like that. Maybe it's the rucks that we might have to talk about, Adgee, about what we can do for them. So we do have 3 rucks today, Oscar Allen, Tom Hickey and Sauce Jacobs. Do you have a particular line of inquiry already for the rucks?
Look, I think there's a couple of ways you can look at it. A lot of that is game script. You know, I think Oscar Allen is going to be someone that's going to give you a lot more flexibility with getting some of those bigger price midfields that might get you some more runs, or points, should I say. But Sauce Jacobs has absolutely been killing it in the sandful. We know he's been desperate to take his spot back off Riley O'Brien. Riley, too many of the fantastic beers here at Colonial already. So Sauce Jacobs is obviously going to be really trying to stamp his authority on the game. So I think there's a couple of options. Hickey's the really interesting one. I think Hickey's probably going to be the lowest owned out of the 3 rucks. He does have some historical records of restricting or at least keeping up with people. So it'll be very interesting to see which path people take. If you want to save some money, go to Oscar Allen. If you want to go, for a little bit more of a premium option, obviously Hickey and Sauce Jacobs are probably going to be your way to go.
Okay, fair enough. All right, let's move on to then the defence then. So we've got some interesting options above 10K. We've got Rory Laird and Shannon Hurd that you want to touch on straight away. Is there a particular one of those 2 you're looking at?
Well, I think there's probably 4 to talk about. You know what I mean? So you've got Shannon Hurn and Shepherd for West Coast, and you've got Laird and Smith for Adelaide. They're probably classed as the 4 main premiums that you look for either team. There's some interesting dynamics for all of them. Let's touch on Adelaide for a second. Laird is obviously just a fantasy beast, has been absolutely dominating. You sort of know what he's going to get every week. And Smith has been taking a lot of the kick-ins, so there's a lot, again, equally scores very well. But there's a very interesting thing about the tag, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But on the West Coast side of things, Shannon Hurn is someone who is just, what he gets every week. His ceiling is high, but he probably hasn't been playing as well this year as he normally has. But he's one of those guys that you're going to get your 90 or 100 points every time. Shepherd has actually been had a huge improvement over the last couple of weeks, and maybe that's because of a little bit of a drop-off from Hurn. Yeah. But I think any of those 4 are going to be a real key pillar for you to build your backline around.
Look, Eagles looking great. You're looking at options below 10K. I've got some options here, and I want you to say yes or no. Yep. Give me some hot takes. Okay. You're the tout here, so let me go through. Jake Kelly, 9.8K.
Nah, not a great upside. Don't want to waste the money on him.
All right. What about old McGovern down back, intercept marker?
McGovern is an interesting one. Obviously can drop off the play a little bit and take a lot of intercept marks, as you mentioned. But again, his ceiling isn't incredibly high. Yes, he might score you a 100 or a little bit over, but very likely he's going to be a 70, 75 player 9 times out of 10.
Now, Andy Otten's actually got defender status, and he's at 9K. What do you think about Andy Otten's chances today?
Andy Otten's an interesting one. Because with Sam Jacobs being the solo ruckman for Adelaide, we can't really work out who else is going to take any kind of ruck. I actually think Otten may play a little bit forward and perhaps take a little bit of that forward ruck time off Sauce Jacobs. But look, Andy Otten, he's a 60-point player. I highly doubt he's going to be scoring something huge for you.
Now, interesting, I had a lot of people talk about Lewis Jetta over the last couple of days on the Twitter. Lewis Jetta, what's he at? 8.6K? Any chance?
Not for me. He won't be in either of my teams. I think he's one of those players that probably a few things need to go right. He's just a run-of-the-mill player. For me, I think there's a lot better picks.
Now, in my team today, I do have Luke Brown, so just go easy. 8.4.
Oh, an amazing choice. I'm lying. No, wouldn't want to touch Luke Brown. Again, he's sort of one of those run-of-the-mill players. I think there's other places I'd prefer to be spending money on in the back line, especially with Adelaide.
I'm flat. Anyone else under 8K that you want to talk about? We did have a question from Warhead on the show on Wednesday, which was Hardigan and Nelson. Yep. They're both under 8K. You've got to tell me now you're going to play one of those players, aren't you?
Well, Nelson, I still wouldn't want to touch it with your money. All right. But I did get a call from Hef this morning when we were talking about a few notes, and he said that he's warming to Hardigan. So Hardigan, I believe, is 6K. So if he gets 40 or 50, that's actually a really good result for 6K. But if he stinks it up and only gets, say, 25 or 30, it's not as bad a loss. And that's probably what I was referring to with these guys like Luke Brown and these other 8 and 9K players. If they go and score a 30 or 40, see you later. Team's gone. But if Hardigan goes and scores 20 or 30, you're probably only 20 points under, 8x value. So, personally, I think that's a safer choice if you want to then try and pair them up with a more expensive defender, opposed to trying to squeeze in a couple of those mid-price, mediocre guys.
I'm gutted already. I might have to change my team once we get off the show. All right, let's move on to the mids. Obviously, there's some great midfielders today, both from Adelaide and West Coast. Around 8-9 guys who can really have good 100-plus games today. What are your initial thoughts from the midfield straight away? Who's your best pick today for the mids?
Look, I think Bryce Gibbs is going to be very popular. I think at his price and historical ceiling, he seems like a no-brainer. Everyone knows about the issues Bryce Gibbs has had this year, in and out of the team, gets a lot of junk possession, can score, 100, 110 without really blinking. Is there 130 in his game? Is there something bigger? I think Adelaide would probably have to be doing well for him to get a little bit of that outside ball. But that's not to say that he can't do it and has done it before. I think he's going to be one of the highest owned players on the slate today.
I would be surprised if he's under 60%. Surely ownership might have to come into it, but 60% plus on a 100 man field, it's almost a safe play that you need.
Well, I probably disagree with you a little bit there. I don't think it'll be that high. I think, you can still have really high ownership in one of these things having 35 to 40%, because realistically, that's almost half the field. He's an interesting one. And I guess, as you sort of mentioned, there is 6 or 8 midfielders, 3 or so from each team, that are just going to get you 100 points. All their flaws are, there's a few outlying numbers of 70s and 80s, but all these guys are going to get you 100, 110, 120. We're talking our Gaffs. We're talking our Crouch brothers. We're talking Sloan. We're talking Shuey. We're talking Dom Sheed. All these guys are very, very capable and relatively safe bets, but you're going to pay for them as well. So that's where the big balance comes in today, of whether or not you want to try to get 2 of those good midfielders in and a couple of mid-rangers, or 3 and a spud. That's going to be a little bit of the balance, because obviously those guys, you're paying anywhere from 13 to 15,000 each for them.
Let's talk about the little spuds, as you referred to. There is a couple of guys down here below 10K. We've got here Mackie at around 9K. Mackay, sorry to the Mackay family back here in Adelaide. We also got Hutchings has been brought into the side. He's that dirt cheap 7K. Now, everyone talks about Hutchins as the tagger. Look, Mackay's a great player at 9K. There'll be on a lot of teams. Hutchins, though, are we going to get some fantasy output for him, or is he just going to be a role as a tagger? And if so, who's your sneaky tag he's going to go to?
Well, as I sort of touched on briefly, the obvious choice when you think any team that is playing Adelaide that has a tagger, let's go to Rory Sloane. But it's been seen a little bit historically now that Hutchings doesn't mind going and tagging one of the deadly halfbacks. So does that mean perhaps he goes to Smith? Does that mean he perhaps goes to Laird? My gut feeling is he goes to Brodie Smith, and even if he limits the effectiveness of his disposal, it might not cut down Smith's fantasy output a whole heap, but his efficiency on the ground and his effectiveness might be really hampered by Hutchings. So Hutchings can get his own ball. I wouldn't be rushing to put him in your team unless you just really needed to fill in a gap because of some of your other players, but he's going to be interesting one. Mackay obviously had an almost a ceiling game last week. He's a great price. A lot of people are going to want again use him to fit in with some of the more expensive players. We'll see. I don't know necessarily. I think he's going to be relatively high owned, perhaps over owned, so that could be an interesting thing to pivot off against someone else.
Okay. All right, let's move on to the forwards, and we've got a variety of selections here today. As we've gone throughout the season, the forwards have been pretty hard to find some good ceiling scores. You usually get that mediocre 60, 70 scores from forwards, and it's no different today. Look, it is highlighted by Tom Lynch for the Crows, and obviously Jamie Cripps for West Coast is also up there at 11K. Any interest of those two players for those teams?
Look, Tom Lynch is a great player. And he will obviously be probably playing a little bit more of a higher forward role. He gets a lot of marks up on the sort of half forward line and on the wing. Going to be very hard to fit him in teams. He's expensive. You're going to really have to match him up with some really cheaper options to be able to make that happen. Cripps is similar. Cripps has a little bit of bias. You know, he had an amazing year last year. Can score, but feels like it's going to be hard to fit him into your team. I think he's going to be relatively low. It's hard to say. My gut feeling is that he's low owned because he's hard to squeeze in, so he might be a good one for you to play. But I think a few things have to go right for both those guys to do well. Sort of moving to the next tier of guys, which I know you're very anxious to ask me about. Just a little thing about, I guess, some game script. West Coast they play very much a web defence. So it's kind of similar to Richmond where they shuffle things across and they move across in a web. On occasions, the ball can get over the back of that web. So if McGovern hasn't cut it off or it hasn't been picked off by the other West Coast defenders, it can bounce over the back or fly over the back. And a couple of weeks ago when West Coast played Collingwood, Mychek kicked 4 goals in that exact scenario. So the question then is, who could be the tall forward for Adelaide that potentially could cash in on that? I don't know the answer.
Well, that's very good research from you, like checking out previous games, but well, it remains to be seen, isn't it?
You want to say, is it Taylor Walker? Can he play a little bit taller and perhaps be that role? My gut feeling is probably no. Is Lynch going to play deeper? Maybe. Is it going to be an Andy Otten? I don't know. There isn't an obvious choice, but I could see that definitely being a little bit of a sneaky, that if you can find that person down the back that's going to, the ball, if the ball gets down there and it gets over the back, might kick quite a few goals.
Fair enough. Well, let's just go through these particular forwards then. Give us a yes or no. I've got here Tex.
Well,
9.3.
Yeah, he's not in my teams, but look, he's one of the greats of the Adelaide Football Club. Can kick a ball a long way, but I just don't think he plays tall enough. And I think the West Coast backline are going to really sort him out.
About Knight at 9.2.
Knight's an interesting one. Let me just find my notes on Knight because I did want to talk about him. And they've escaped me right at this second. But look, I think Knight's one of those ones, again, mid-range player. Probably going to need him to pair up with some other guys if you want to play more premiums. He'll be not overly owned, but I think a few people will have him.
Okay. Kennedy, JJK, 8.9. Obviously, Eagles have a 4-goal start. The goal's going to come from somewhere. But you reckon he needs to kick a few to make a score today?
Yeah, and Kennedy obviously can be a slate breaker. He has the ability of kicking really big bags. But it really feels like over this season, due to injury and also Darling playing really well, that he's happy to play almost a little bit of the decoy role. So, is the same thing going to happen like the other week against Melbourne? Was it that he kicked 3 goals in the first 10 minutes? Everyone was rejoicing, thinking, oh, he's going to have a day out. I think he scored 15 more points for the rest of the game. So I could see Kennedy being a slate breaker, kicking a huge bag, but I can also see it being a slate killer, where you take the gamble on him on a sweet price, and he scores you 45 points.
Fair enough. All right, and there's a couple of boys in the forward pocket, which is Rioli and Liam Ryan. They're both priced around the same. Could we make a case of either of these two today?
Similar players, again, probably need to run a little bit hot and kick a few goals to make it make sense. The only little thing I'll say is Rioli, there's a small chance he may play a little bit of midfield time. So if he does get up into the middle and perhaps gets a little bit more, I can't see him scoring 100. If he does, good luck to him. But I think, he's going to need to kick goals to be a slate breaker.
Now, if we're ever going to run a projections for this particular slate, I reckon someone who will be gaining a lot of ownership in the last 24 hours is Petruccelli at 6K. Pretty cheap price for his value, for his potential. Would you consider having him in your lineup as your last forward?
Well, look, I think between him and Gibbs, they're going to be the two highest owned players. Again, if you're trying to make lineups work with some of these premium players, the reality is you need cheaper players. Petruccelli, everyone remembers that game, I think maybe against Port or something earlier in the year, where he kicked a heap of goals and was running. He's so fast. I think, he needs to kick goals to have a big score. But again, he's 6,000 or whatever he is, doesn't need a hell of a lot to break even. I think him and Gibbs will probably be the two highest owned players in the slate.
Yep. And rightly so. Their values on the DFR site in terms of the cheat sheets are pretty well. Petruccelli is the most valuable player on the site in terms of a potential sell against points. A couple of more strategies before we tie it up for the show today. There's been talk about ruck stacks. All three are actually available to roster on the same team. Would you be so fanciful at actually putting all 3 rucks in your team today?
Well, I remember last night, Smatho, in the wee hours of the morning, after a few quiet drinks, you were throwing around the tactic of the triple ruck stack. I think it's an interesting one. I don't know necessarily whether it'll be a winning strategy, but it could be interesting. I think playing double ruck could be an interesting ploy. I don't know whether or not I'd be wanting to play Hickey and Allen together. I think it would be more likely a Source and Allen combo. Again, interesting one, not too sure, but good luck with it. Sometimes you got to be a little bit different to win the big money.
Now, before I go to my sneaky bet tonight, I want to ask Adgee I don't care who's going to win the belt today, but how they're going to win the belt today. What is your optimal lineup today for this particular slate?
I think a good contested battle is what we want. If you find one of those games where West Coast particularly just dominate, some of the mids and those guys are just going to go off, and there could be some really obscure scores. A good tight battle would be nice. Adelaide obviously have a little bit to play for now. I think they're going to, try, or they should be trying. But, Adelaide might bring it. I'm not necessarily suggesting going an Adelaide stack, but again, sometimes you have to be a little bit different, and as we've seen this weekend, some crazy results have been happening. So who knows what could happen? Who knows? But I imagine it's probably going to be a forward for one of the teams is going to be the slate breaker. That's what's going to win it for somebody.
Adgee, stepping up the plate here for the DFR Down Under show. Magnificent effort today, mate.
Thank you.
We're going to have a quiet Colonial beer today. I'm not sure you're into the beers, are you, mate?
Oh, well, with you, Smatho, always.
Before I go, sneaky bet, West Coast, 39.5 and over. I'm all over that. I'm not sure how much it is. It must be $3 or $4. But after the results of this weekend, I see a trend going on. As you said, Adelaide, though, they've got something to play for with the Bombers losing. I might have to think about it, but got to stick to the data on the DFR site. Adgee, as always, thank you for joining us on the DFR Down Under show. Keep an eye on our Twitter feed, YouTube, Facebook. The atmosphere is starting to build now. The guests will be starting to pour in. 5:20 kickoff. We'll be updating throughout this afternoon and the evening. Any comments, anytime, hit us up on our Twitter feed at RankingCFS. Adgee, thank you very much, mate.
Thank you, Smatho, and good luck. Congratulations on you getting your ticket. So let's hopefully maybe I'm interviewing you at the end of the day.
Let's hope so. Take it easy, guys. Thank you very much.